All men cheat, but not mine, I thought until a man from the funeral service approached me at his funeral and put a note in my hands. It was written in neat handwriting. I was your husband's mistress. I'm pregnant. If you want to leave this child, come to the gas station near the Four Cheeses Pizzeria. I'll wait there at PM. My vision went dark. It became difficult to breathe. It looked like someone's cruel joke. In 1 year I lost my son, my husband, and my faith in people. If Sam could betray me, why should I cry for him now, and why do I need his child? My name is Cynthia, yes, Cynthia like the 60s song, and I've never been the sort of woman who lets life park on my neck. I'm 58. I know how to file my own taxes, snake a drain, and make a judge raise an eyebrow without saying a single impolite word. Still, that note, it burned a hole straight through the black dress I'd ironed at dawn. The bow-tied funeral director hovered a respectful 3 paces away, the choir hummed a tired hymn, and someone behind me sniffled into a tissue as if they were auditioning for a tragedy. I kept my face still. Marble. If marble had cheekbones. They lined up to feed me condolences like dry crackers. He was a pillar, said one woman who once told me my potato salad was interesting. He adored you, said another, a man who'd never met a mirror he didn't try to seduce. They patted my arm as if sadness were stored there like change in a pocket. I thanked them all with the grace I keep for PTA fundraisers and jury duty. Tight smile, gentle nod. But tears? Not one. Anger had boarded up my ducts and hung a condemned sign. I had wept enough for a lifetime 3 months ago, when we placed my Joshua in the ground, and I promised myself I'd keep his urn near me until his 1st anniversary. After you've stood over your child's fresh dirt, there's not much left inside that can break the same way. I didn't wait for the last amen. The minister was gearing up to describe Sam as steady and faithful, and I'm a kind woman, not a liar. I slipped out through the side door like a rumor, tugging off my black gloves as if they might be bugged. Outside, January wind slapped me sober. I inhaled the kind of cold that cleans you out and headed home. Sam's office smelled like cedar and old ambition. The whiskey he bragged about cellaring was lined up like soldiers on a shelf. I chose the bottle he'd said was too peaty for you, Sin, and poured 2 fingers into the crystal glass he never let guests touch. Cheers to the truth, I told the room, and took a swallow that scratched my throat like it had secrets of its own. Then I started hunting. Rule 1: when men surprise you, follow the money. The safe was behind the framed diploma he hadn't earned so much as purchased with night classes and charm. Combination? Please. Sam had used our wedding anniversary for every lock like the world was one big sentimental iPhone. Inside, life insurance statements, a showbox of receipts, a folder labeled installations, and well hello, stranger, a velvet ring box empty as a politician's promise. I opened drawers, slid hands under file folders, felt along the underside of the desk for taped envelopes. You'd think men would understand by now that women can find anything. We catalog babies' fevers in our sleep and where the Phillips had migrated to, but sure hide your sins in a bottom drawer. Bank app open. I scrolled through 6 months of statements. The man who claimed he had terrible taste and therefore never bought me jewelry had developed a sudden passion for retail therapy. 10 purchases at Bella and Rue, the boutique that sells dresses to girls who grin at cameras they bought with other people's money. And 4 at Kavanaugh and Gould Jewelers, where Sam once told me the pearls were a bit too clean for my skin tone. A charge at a maternity clinic downtown Misk. Services. My stomach dropped through the rug. Sam, I said to the empty room, what did you buy there, if you didn't bring me any gifts? If you constantly told me you had bad taste, then you didn't give anything except elsewhere? The whiskey set up a small bonfire in my chest. The clock told me it was 5:42. The note told me a gas station rendezvous was scheduled for 7 o'clock. My better angels told me to call the police. My worse ones, who were red lipstick and keep receipts, told me to learn everything before I showed my badge to God. I called Henry. If there's a man you can call when life hands you a live grenade, find him before you need him. Henry was Sam's best friend from college and the lone decent habit Sam never managed to break. Tall, careful with words, a lawyer who could thread a needle with a subpoena. He'd been the guy who moved our sofa after my back surgery. He'd been the guy who showed up when Joshua's car was found twisted like a paperclip. I told myself I called him because I needed legal advice and a witness if I were about to rendezvous with a ghost. Truth is, I also needed someone who knew how Sam smiled when he lied. Sin? His voice came warm, tired. How are you holding up? Don't pet me, Henry, I said. Just come over, He arrived in 20 minutes with that leather messenger bag and flowers someone else had bought. I didn't make him sit. I didn't offer coffee. I just handed him the note. He read it once, then again, his jaw clenching in that way the world taught him to call control. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I laughed, brittle as the winter branches thwacking the window. "Seriously, Henry? Do you feel sorry for me? Do you feel sorry that this traitor has finally deprived me of his presence and all the shame and pain he has caused me? Tell me the truth. I only want the truth. Who is she? How did he meet her? How long has he been sleeping with her behind my back? Tell me everything." Silence. The kind that changes the shape of a room. Henry's hands were at his sides, open, but his eyes were barricades. I stepped closer and tapped his forearm with both my palms, a staccato beat that said, "Answer me." He caught my wrist gently, like I was something you study without caging. "Do you want the truth?" he asked. "I want it the way I want coffee, strong and without sweeteners." He breathed out. "I love you, Cynthia. I always have." And then his mouth was on mine, soft and wild both, a confession and an apology. I should have pushed him away, funeral black still warm, betrayal still smoking, but grief makes you honest, and anger makes you brave. I let that kiss happen like rain on thirsty ground. 1 second, 2, 3. When we came up for air, I touched his cheek with the back of my hand like the old movies taught me to do. "You should have told me sooner," I said, voice even. "Now tell me everything else." He did. The first time he saw Sam with her, parking lot near the courthouse, spring. The way Sam had brushed Henry off when confronted. "It's not what you think." Men love that line like it's an insurance policy. Henry tried again, later, when the charges appeared on a shared business ledger he could legally view. Sam said he was consulting for a client who needed discretion. Bella and Rue apparently offered legal pads now. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, not bothering to hide the crack in my voice. "I tried once," he said, "but you were so happy that day, talking about Joshua's new job, and I thought, let me gather proof first. And then the accident. I couldn't pile more on your back." He ran a hand over his face. I was a coward. By then I was crying, quietly, messily, not out of love for the man we'd buried but for the foolishness he made of me. Henry pulled me into his chest. He smelled like cold air and sandalwood. I let one sob out, and then another, and then I was done. I don't linger in puddles. "Do you love me?" I asked. "How long? Why have you been silent all this time? And what about Sarah?" The name tasted strange. She'd been his wife since Jesus took up carpentry. "Sarah and I haven't lived together since last year," he said, grief aloud but clean. "We're separated. Papers drafted. No drama. We lost each other slowly. It happens. I should have told you sooner. Everyone should have told me sooner," I said, and the clock on the wall chirped 6:17 like a reprimand. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder I'd set to stop myself from pretending the note was a lie. "Gas station, 7:00 p.m. I have to go," I told him, and then I told him everything I'd been saying to myself since the church. "You see, I lost my son. And now my husband. I don't want to live out my life alone. If I adopt this child now, he'll remind me of my Joshua. He was like his father." I didn't pass anything on to him. My hand drifted to the urn on the mantel, dark walnut, heavy with the only thing in this house that still mattered. I touched it like a cheek, then picked up the photo of Joshua grinning in that ill-advised mustache phase and kissed his forehead. "Mama's not done," I whispered. "Not by a mile." Henry's lawyer brain had kicked on. "If this mistress is real and pregnant, there are legal paths, Sin. But we need caution. No cash, no commitments. We vet everything." "Bring your bag," I said. "And your conscience." "I'll bring the steel." We drove through a bruised purple evening toward the Four Cheeses Pizzeria, which has the good sense to smell like hope and oregano. The gas station 2 doors down was one of those fluorescents, our prayer kinds, bright enough to confess under. 6:53. A young attendant in a beanie stalked windshield fluid with the solemnity of a monk. My hands reeked of sandalwood from Henry's coat. My heart beat like a trapped moth. She arrived at 6:58 in a teal hatchback with a dented bumper and a "Dogs are people" sticker peeling at the edges. 28 if that. Beautiful in the way of women who grew up Googling contouring, gloss mouth, liner sharp enough to sign checks. A winter coat one size too large, as if she were already making room for the life inside. She stepped out, eyes searching, then found me, black dress, funeral hair, mouth set like a door at closing time. "You're Cynthia," she said. "And you," I said, "are a very poor decision in a very lovely coat." She flinched. then stood taller. My name is Leela. Of course it was. I'm 5 months along, she said, palm circling her belly like she had to remind herself what side she was on. It's Sam's. Henry stayed 2 paces behind me, hands visible, posture relaxed, the way good men look when they're ready to be bad if they have to. I nodded at her car. We're not doing this under security cameras. Sit. Inside the hatchback, the heater coughed audibly like an old man who'd snuck a cigarette. Leela's hands trembled. She laid an envelope on the console. This is my medical record, she said. I'll carry the baby to term and hand over parental rights. I want $200,000. Half now, half when he's born. I stared at the envelope like it might unfurl teeth. That's not adoption, I said. That's a ransom. It's what he promised. Her chin lifted, a girl daring the sea to come closer. He said he'd take care of me and the baby. Now he's dead. I don't have anyone. I don't even want. She bit off the sentence like it tasted of metal. I can't raise a child alone, but I won't be left with nothing. I thought of Joshua's room, still smelling faintly of motor oil and that cologne young men mistake for personality. I thought of Sam, whose promises had always been buy one get none. I thought of my body, which had never given me a daughter to braid nor a second son to share the strain. I thought of being 68 someday and sipping tea while a child with Sam's eyes played with blocks on my rug, and how complicated love could be if you had the nerve to hold it anyway. Henry unfolded himself into the passenger seat. I'm Henry Walters, he said mildly. I'm an attorney. What you're describing can be formalized legally. Leela threw an adoption plan with expenses paid, not purchase. No cash exchanges in gas station lots. She narrowed her eyes. Expenses? You mean rent and food? That won't fix my life. No, I said, but nothing will if you start it with a crime. We negotiated in a triangle of breath and headlights. A proper OB appointment, a DNA test at the right interval, a reputable adoption agency who wouldn't clutch pearls at a grieving wife, documented support rent, prenatal care, maternity clothes, nothing that could be construed as buying a baby. Leela softened by degrees, like butter in a warm dish. If it's a boy, she murmured once, as if to herself, he kicks on the right side when I play Motown. If it's a boy, I said, he's going to learn that women build fortresses out of ashes. 7:34. A plan penciled, not inked. We exchanged numbers. Henry photographed her record with her consent and texted her a list of clinics and a counselor's contact. I tucked my rage back inside its holster and reached for the door. That's when Leela's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and the color drained from her face. One message. No name. Just a number and words that rearranged the night. Don't leave. I see you. Ask the widow about the lake house. Her gaze flicked to me. What lake house? I don't have a lake house, I said, and felt my spine lie for the first time in months. Sam did. Up north. A place he'd stopped inviting me to once Joshua got old enough to notice adults being unhappy. The last time I'd been there, a red canoe waited at the dock and the pantry held marshmallows I didn't remember buying. Who sent that? Henry asked, already scanning mirrors, already cataloging shadows. Leela swallowed. Another buzz. Another message. You want to see the girl alive? 100,000 of you. Then, tomorrow, midnight. Instructions to follow. She squeezed the phone so hard her knuckles blanched. Someone knows about us. About you. I felt the world tilt a few degrees, enough to make a woman spill the truth she hadn't digested yet. We're not paying a dime to anyone who texts from the dark, I said. We do this my way now. And your way is what? Leela whispered. I opened the door and let the cold bathe my anger. To stop crying over dead men, I said, and start making the living ones very, very sorry. I looked at Henry. He nodded like a man who'd decided the same thing a while ago. We stepped out into the fluorescent bright, our breath fogging, 3 unlikely musketeers in a parking lot that smelled like gasoline and melted cheese. Behind the glass of the pizzeria, a family laughed over paper plates, grease glowing like stained glass halos. My phone buzzed again. A new reminder slid across the screen, one I hadn't set. Pick up Sam's ashes tomorrow at the funeral home's automated cruelty. Henry, I said evenly, if I never pick up that urn, will anyone arrest me? No, he said, but I'll take care of it for you. Do, I answered, staring at my reflection in the gas station window, hair a bit wild, eyes steady. And then help me find out who's watching us. I turned back to Leela. Tomorrow you go to the doctor I text you, I said. We'll start the legal path. If Sam's the father, we'll make sure you're safe, fed, and not alone. But if someone thinks they can blackmail me into paying for the privilege of being mother again, I smiled then, not kindly. They have never met Cynthia. The wind lifted, and a paper napkin somersaulted across the cement, coming to rest at my feet. In someone else's neat handwriting, it might have been sweet. In mine, it was a promise. Drive home, I told Leela. Don't open your door to anyone. Answer only my calls or Henry's. And if you see a teal hatchback in your rearview for the next week, don't worry. That'll be me. She blinked. You? I'm a fast learner, I said. And I've got a full tank. We watched her taillights disappear into the city's throat. Henry slipped his hand into mine. No demand, no assumption, just an anchor. I let it be. Lake house? He asked quietly. Tomorrow, I said. After the doctor. After the ashes. We're going to take a little trip north and ask the trees what they saw. He smiled. The kind that knows trouble and likes the taste. You sure you want to open that door? I do, I said, already mapping the rooms, already counting the lies. And when I do, I'm bringing a crowbar. We stood there a moment longer, two figures under stadium lights, planning a war against ghosts with contracts, common sense, and a spine. Then I let go of his hand, slid into my car, and cranked the engine. As I pulled away, my phone chimed one last time. A new text from an unknown number, a photo attachment loading slow as dread. When it resolved, I nearly drove up onto the curb. It was my son's urn, on the mantle, in my house, and a reflection in the glass. Someone standing in my living room taking the picture. When your dead son's urn shows up in a stranger's photo, you don't scream, you simmer. It's the difference between panic and purpose. I stared at that image glowing on my phone, the familiar walnut urn, the photo of Joshua beside it, and in the reflection, the outline of a person. A tall one, male maybe. My blood turned cold enough to make the whiskey on my breath blush. I didn't tell Henry right away. I let the silence between us grow thick as the winter air while I drove home. He followed in his car, headlights steady behind me. Every red light felt like a dare. When I reached the house, I didn't rush in. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and just watched. The porch light glowed, the way I'd left it, warm and ordinary. My front door was still closed, but the living room curtains, those heavy, sage green ones Sam used to complain were too serious, were parted slightly, as though someone wanted to peek out. I dialed Henry. Stay where you are, I said. Cynthia, I mean it. I'm not walking into my own house until I know what's inside. I got out of the car, crunching over frost, every sound too loud. My keys were clenched like a weapon in my fist. I moved slowly up the steps, glanced through the window, and saw nothing. No shadow, no movement, just my reflection, gray and ghostly. But when I opened the door, the smell hit me first. Not fear, not blood perfume, a woman's, something floral and cheap. It hung in the air like bad manners. My living room looked untouched, except for one thing. The urn. It had been moved. It wasn't centered on the mantle anymore. It was turned slightly sideways, as if someone had picked it up, examined it, and set it down carelessly. I felt that shift in my bones, like someone had opened a wound. I'd stitched myself. Who the hell were you showing off to, Sam? I whispered. Even in death, you're causing trouble. Henry came in quietly behind me, hand resting near the inside of his jacket, his lawyer's version of ready for anything. Everything looks fine, he said. Locks weren't forced. Nothing stolen. That's what thieves say before they take your piece, I muttered, scanning the room. Then I noticed something else on the coffee table. A napkin. The same brand as the one that had blown across the gas station lot earlier. I stepped closer. Written in the same neat handwriting as the note from the funeral was a single line. You're not ready to learn everything yet. Henry picked it up with the corner of a tissue, cautious. Same handwriting? Exactly the same. I looked around. They've been in here, while we were gone, watching. He looked at me hard. You need to stay somewhere else tonight. I gave him a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Henry, I've had burglars, betrayals, and botched casseroles. I'm not about to let anyone chase me out of my own damn house, he sighed. Then I'm staying. Suit yourself, I said. Guest room's clean, fridge has bourbon. He smiled a little at that. You mean bourbon in the fridge? Precisely. Cold men and cold drinks easier to handle that way. While Henry checked windows and doors, I went to Sam's office again. I opened the safe, the drawers, the folder labeled installations. I hadn't looked through it earlier. Inside were photos taken at the lake house. A woman laughing by the dock, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a fishing pole. Leela, My stomach twisted. On the back of one photo, in Sam's handwriting, was a single phrase, for when she arrives. She, not he. Sam had known. He'd planned. I slid the photo toward Henry when he came in. He exhaled through his teeth. That confirms the affair. But this, he tapped the folder. This also confirms she was staying at the lake house. Probably still connected somehow. I'm going there tomorrow, I said. You're not going alone. I didn't ask permission, sweetheart. But yes, you're coming. He smiled faintly, like he'd expected that answer. You always this stubborn? Since birth, I said. My mother tried to spank it out of me once. The wooden spoon broke. That got a quiet laugh out of him. For a brief, fragile second, I remembered what it felt like to laugh without guilt. Then my phone buzzed again. New text. Don't make me ask twice. The lake house. Tomorrow? Alone. Bring what's mine. What's theirs? Henry asked, reading over my shoulder. I stared at the screen, the words pulsing. Maybe they mean money. Maybe they mean the baby. Maybe they mean me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Sam's office with the curtains drawn, whiskey in hand, the safe open beside me. The house creaked around me like an old ship remembering storms. I kept glancing at the photo of Leela, at the neat handwriting on that napkin, and at the urn that no longer sat straight on the mantel. I spoke aloud, to no one, or maybe to Sam. You love secrets, didn't you? You collected them like trophies. But here's one for you. I'm better at keeping them than you ever were. At 3:00 a.m., Henry came downstairs, barefoot and sleepy-eyed. You're still awake. So are you. He poured himself a splash of whiskey, sat across from me. The two of us looked like old conspirators. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking that if someone went through this much trouble to lead me to the lake house, it's not just about Leela. There's something else. Maybe something he hid there. Money, maybe. Or evidence. Or both. Sam was good at things, smiling and scheming. Henry nodded. Then we go tomorrow, early, before your mystery texter expects you. Good, I said, because I don't like being told when to arrive. Morning came gray and sharp. I packed an overnight bag, flashlight, gloves, one of Sam's old notebooks, and a revolver that hadn't been fired since Joshua was born. It wasn't loaded, yet. Henry drove. The lake was 2 hours north, surrounded by evergreens and gossiping wind. The roads were empty, the sky low. I sipped burnt gas station coffee and stared out the window, thinking about Leela's scared face, the blackmail messages, the perfume in my living room. Every thread led back to Sam and now, to this lake. When we arrived, the gate was open. That alone was wrong. Sam was meticulous about locks. The path to the cabin was half frozen, tire tracks still visible in the snow. Someone had been here recently. Stay close, Henry said, scanning the woods. You forget, I raised a teenager. I can handle danger. The front door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and something sour. The place was a time capsule. Sam's fishing gear leaning against the wall, a blanket I'd crocheted years ago draped over the sofa, magazines curled at the corners. And then, a shock of modernity. A woman's scarf, pale pink, lying on the armchair. I picked it up. The perfume hit instantly, the same scent that had clung to my living room. Leela, I whispered. Henry crouched near the fireplace. Cyn, he said, you need to see this. He'd found a box half buried under the ash logs. Inside, papers, envelopes, photos, and cash stacks of it, bound with rubber bands. I counted quickly. At least $50,000. Insurance money? Henry asked. No, I said slowly. Sam hadn't filed the claim yet. This isn't from his account. This is something else. Tucked among the bills was a single photograph. Leela again, but this time not smiling. Sitting in a car, hand over her belly, staring straight ahead. Sam's handwriting on the back. She doesn't know. She doesn't know what. Henry muttered. Whatever this is about, I said, it's deeper than infidelity. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You're late. Check the dock. We moved together fast. The dock jutted into the frozen lake, groaning under our boots. Something was tied to one of the posts, a waterproof plastic bag, weighed down with a rock. I pulled it free, heart hammering, and opened it. Inside was another note, the handwriting now unmistakable. He lied to you both. Come alone next time, or I'll tell her what he did to Joshua. The name hit me like a slap. What he did to Joshua. I read it again and again, the words rearranging my understanding of grief. Cynthia, Henry said carefully. What could that mean? Nothing, I lied. my voice thin, but my mind was screaming. Sam and Joshua had fought the week before the accident. About money. About the lake house, in fact. Joshua had wanted to sell it, said Dad didn't need a secret getaway while the family bled bills. Sam had refused. That night, Joshua drove off, furious. The police called it a single car crash. But now, I turned to Henry, eyes blazing. We're not leaving. Not yet. What do you think we'll find? Answers. Or the devil? And I'm ready for both. I looked back at the still lake, the frozen reflection of sky, and whispered, Sam, you've got one last lie left to die for. Henry put his hand on my shoulder. You want to head back, regroup? I shook my head. No, whoever's playing this game thinks I'm fragile. They're about to learn otherwise, and with that, I walked back toward the cabin, the scarf still in my hand, the cold biting but my resolve burning. Somewhere in those walls, in those papers, in that silence, was the truth about my husband, my son, and a child not yet born, and I'd drag every ghost in this cursed family into the light before I let anyone else write the ending. I always thought silence was peaceful until I learned it could lie. That morning, standing in the lake house with the scarf of my husband's mistress in my hand, I realized silence was the most dangerous accomplice of all. It lets secrets rot in peace. It lets men like Sam die looking like saints. Henry was pacing. I could tell he was torn between protecting me and wanting to uncover the truth himself. Cynthia, he said, glancing toward the door, whoever's been here could still be close. This isn't safe. I laughed. A sharp, dry sound. Henry, nothing about my life has been safe since the day I said I do. You can leave if you're scared, but I've got ghosts to interrogate. He stayed, of course. The man would probably follow me into hell and offer to take notes. We started combing through the cabin, every drawer, every closet. Sam wasn't subtle, but he was thorough. He kept things that didn't belong to him, letters, receipts, little trophies of deceit. The box from the fireplace had only been the appetizer. Under the bed, I found the main course, a hidden compartment in the floorboard, nailed shut but not sealed. I pried it open with the iron poker from the hearth, and there it was, a folder wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Inside, documents, a few photographs, and a flash drive. Henry frowned, slipping on gloves from his pocket. You think it's business? Business doesn't come with perfume stains, I said. One of the envelopes was labeled J.L. Leela's initials. Inside were printed emails between Sam and a fertility clinic. I skimmed the headers. Appointments, donor profile, confidential agreement. My pulse started hammering. Henry, I whispered, she might not even be pregnant with his child. He might have arranged something else. He took the pages, scanning quickly. No, look, these were dated after the clinic visits. He used his own sample. These signatures are his. I swallowed. So the child is his. There goes my one remaining illusion. Then, at the bottom of the folder, I found a thin black notebook. Sam's handwriting again. It was a record, dates, transactions, names, and one entry that froze me where I stood. April 12th, J. Found out. Tried to warn him off. Said I'd explain later. Joshua. Henry caught the look on my face. What? I turned the book so he could see. April 12th, I said. The night before Joshua's crash. He said they argued, but he wouldn't tell me about what. Henry, what if Sam was lying about how that fight ended? He took a step closer, steady but cautious. You think Sam had something to do with it? I think Sam could convince anyone of anything, including me. Maybe he didn't kill our boy, but he could have sent him driving angry, desperate. Maybe that's what this blackmailer means. What he did to Joshua. Henry rubbed his jaw. We'll need to verify this. Check the police report, the autopsy, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were fixed on the flash drive. We'll see what's on that first. The cabin didn't have a computer, but Henry had brought his laptop. Always prepared, that man. He plugged it in. Files popped up immediately, videos, labeled by date. The first few were dull, fishing trips, cabin renovations, a storm rolling over the lake. Then came a file named Doc Night, MP4. Play it, I said. Henry hesitated. Cynthia, if this is what I think, play it. He clicked. The screen showed the dock at night. The camera angle was shaky, probably from a phone. A flashlight beam swept across the water, then steadied on two figures, Sam, unmistakable even in the low light, and another person standing across from him, tall, angry. Joshua. The sound was faint, but clear enough. Joshua's voice. You're disgusting, Dad. She's my age. Sam. Watch your mouth. You don't understand, Joshua. You're having a baby with her while mom's the rest was wind, snapping like a whip. Then the camera jolted, as if the person holding it stumbled. A splash, darkness. The video ended. I sat perfectly still. Henry's hand found mine. Cynthia, I want it played again. Maybe you again. We watched it twice more. The same words, the same splash. There was no proof of what happened after, but the timeline lined up to perfectly. The next night, Joshua's car had gone off the bridge. I stood, walked to the window, stared out at that same dock, still standing, still smug. He let me bury our son thinking it was an accident, I said. He came home that night, washed the lake off his hands, and told me to be strong. I cooked him dinner, Henry. I made him pasta. Henry didn't answer. What could he say? The truth was an animal loose in the room now, pacing, waiting to bite. After a long silence, he said softly, "We should take all this to the police." "No," I said immediately. He blinked. "Cynthia, this could reopen the case." "Yes, and you know who they'll suspect first." "Me. The widow who just discovered her husband's affair and started receiving creepy notes. They'll think I'm trying to settle scores." "Then what do you want to do?" I turned, my voice calm but cold. "I want to finish what Sam started, on my terms. That baby, his baby, will be born into my care, not hers. And I'm going to make sure the world remembers Sam for what he was." Henry stared at me, measuring whether I was serious. He must have seen the answer in my face. "Cynthia, revenge isn't justice. It's the only language the dead seem to understand," I said. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "You found it. Good. Now you know what kind of man he was. Don't trust her." "Her?" I repeated aloud. "Leela." The message was followed by coordinates. "Not far, just across the lake." Henry frowned. "A trap. Probably. But if it's a trap, it's set for me, not you. I'm not letting you go alone." I looked at him, my tired, loyal, foolish Henry, and smiled, just enough to break the tension. "Fine, you can come, but you stay behind me. If there's trouble, I'd rather they shoot me first. I'm the one wearing black. It's more poetic." He didn't laugh this time. We left the cabin, following the trail around the frozen shore. The air was thin and sharp. The trees looked like gossiping witnesses, hunched together in judgment. After about 20 minutes, we reached a small boathouse, half collapsed under snow. Inside, huddled on a bench, was Leela. She looked worse than before, pale, shaking, her coat muddy. When she saw me, she flinched. "You weren't supposed to bring anyone," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to vanish after threatening texts," I said. "We're both disappointing someone." She clutched her belly protectively. "I didn't send those messages." "Of course you didn't." I crouched down so we were eye level. "Then who did?" "I don't know," she cried. "They called me after the funeral, said they had proof Sam was using me, that he planned to leave me with nothing. They told me to get money from you or they'd make it look like I helped him cover something up." I didn't know what to do. Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "Leela, you have to tell us who's behind this. Names, numbers, anything." She shook her head. "I never saw them. The calls came from blocked numbers. They knew things about me, about the pregnancy, about Sam's promises. They said he recorded everything." I felt the pieces start to click into place. "The video," I said. "Someone else was there that night at the dock. Someone who filmed it." Leela nodded weakly. "I think so. They said Sam wasn't supposed to die yet. They wanted the money from him first." Henry frowned. "Money? What money?" "The 50,000 in the cabin," I said quietly. "Maybe that was part of it." Leela's eyes widened. "You found it?" I stood slowly. "Yes. And I also found evidence that ties Sam to my son's death." She covered her mouth. "Oh, God." "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady. "I'll handle it. You just make sure you and that baby stay alive long enough for me to decide what to do with you." Her lip trembled. "You hate me." I sighed. "I don't have the energy for hate, dear, but I'm excellent at management. And right now, you're a problem I intend to manage." Henry gave me a look halfway between admiration and fear. "You're terrifying when you're calm," he muttered. "I'm a widow," I said. "Calm is how we reload." We helped Leela to her feet and got her into the car. She was shivering uncontrollably. On the way back to town, she kept glancing out the window as if expecting someone to follow. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself for years, when I suspected Sam of cheating, when Joshua stopped coming home for dinner, when life itself felt like a stalker. At the motel, I settled her in a room under Henry's name. He insisted on staying in the room next door, just until we figure out who's behind all this, he said. As we stepped out into the cold night again, he turned to me. What are you planning, Cynthia? I smiled faintly. Something Sam never managed closure. He didn't press further. Smart man. Back in my car, I looked at the photo of Joshua I kept tucked in the visor. You see, baby, I whispered, your mother's not done fighting yet. I'm going to clean up your father's mess, one lie at a time. Then I drove off into the dark, toward the funeral home, because tomorrow, I had ashes to collect and a message to deliver to the man who thought death would save him from my wrath. There are a few things grief teaches you that nobody preaches in those teary pamphlets the funeral homes hand out. 1. People assume you're fragile and therefore dispensable. 2. The world will try to sell you a new normal the moment your old one collapses. 3. If you don't learn how to do paperwork with a clenched jaw, someone will sell you a bridge before breakfast. After the boathouse confrontation, things accelerated the way storms do when they mean business. Leela's panic didn't stop with a motel room and a flush bank account. The very next morning her phone went dead, like someone had slid a hand over the sun. Calls to her number bounced, her apartment key gone. She'd been gone from the motel for 12 hours before we tracked her down, shaking in a friend's basement and refusing to meet anyone in the light. She said the men who'd been texting her had come in person that night when she was home alone. They were polite at first, then not. They took her bag, her old phone, and one small silver locket she'd been planning to give the baby. They warned her not to try to leave the city, or they'd send her to Sam early. When she told me this, her hands were cold and quick like the hands of someone who'd learned to hide bruises. If there's one thing I've learned about blackmail, it's that it's rarely about the money at first. It's about control. The money makes it loud. The control is quieter and more dangerous. The text that had arrived for me: you want to see the girl alive? 100,000 of you. Read like an ultimatum and a dare at once. Henry read it over my shoulder at the kitchen island, the light above casting him like a man ready for cross-examination. He folded the napkin with lawyerly care and said what lawyers say when they want to be very practical. We don't pay. That's the cardinal rule in any extortion manual I've ever had to write in my head. The second rule: do not let the extortionist control the timeline. Cynthia, Henry continued, if you pay once, they'll come back. If you involve the police now, we might get you arrested later for obstruction or worse. Let me check the phone traces. Let me see what the messages really show. Let Leela talk to a counselor. We document everything. He sounded like a man reading from a legal hymn sheet, calming and perfectly correct. I looked at him and for half a second I considered the novelty of living a life without playing every piece on the chessboard at once. But I've never been the widow who writes a check to silence a stranger. I'm the widow who asks the stranger to explain his math. Don't be sanctimonious, I told him, which is how I tried to shame his caution into activity. If these people think they can take a child from me with a demand, then we'll take a different kind of note home for dinner. He insisted we do not meet anyone in a parking lot with cash. He suggested gently, like a man placing a bandage, that we use the clinic and the law as buffers. He proposed the most tedious, respectable plan possible: legal counsel for Leela, a credible trust account to hold support funds, monitored transfers, and a team of lawyers on notice if anything untoward happened. He advised against the theatrics. He also advised me not to marry anyone impulsively. My eyebrow went up so fast I nearly dislocated it. Marrying someone just to prove you're not alone is far more dramatic than practical, he said, and a judge will sigh and ask whether this is a creditor-driven marriage. I told him I had no plans to run to a lawyer and sign myself into a romance for the sake of paperwork. But I also knew I needed someone beside me who would see the horizon the same way I do. Henry had been that person for a long time in small, careful ways. He had been the person who'd held my hand in the air and the one who'd written condolence letters with my name on them when my own pen felt useless. I resented him for arriving late to the battle, yet I was grateful his armor fit. 2 days after Leela's disappearance and the ransom message, she showed up at my door like a woman who'd been through a cheap movie and come out determined to write better scenes. She had been released or run away, whichever read better. Her father, some gentle soul a few states away, had wired the money the blackmailers demanded, and she'd been left in an alley with a cigarette butt and a packet of Kleenex. She was terrified and ashamed, thinking her compliance had made her complicit in something that now crept at the periphery of my life like fog. I let her sit across from me in the kitchen while Henry made coffee as if nothing in the world had snapped. Leela told us it had been stupid paying a man she didn't know, but she had looked at an empty fridge and thought the baby needed formula more than she needed her dignity. That was the sort of math poverty forces people into. I didn't scold her. I cataloged instead. Any good revenge plot begins with an inventory. Names, dates, receipts, who saw what and when. Did they say anything about Sam? I asked casually. Any names? No, she said. Only that they had footage of him and the doc. They said he was worse than I thought. Her eyes went distant. They kept saying, he can't be allowed to get away with everything. And what is everything? I asked, voice steady. She shrugged. I don't know, but they were insistent he'd hidden things. Files, money. Someone at the clinic said Sam paid in cash once, for a consultation. He was careful, he always was. Henry got into his suit and lawyer lorried around with phone numbers and contingency plans while I called the clinic. We'd scoped out. The doctor's office smelled clean and faintly of antiseptic and schedule efficiency. Leela sat on the edge of the exam table, knees together, hands in her lap like the hands of someone holding a secret prisoner. 5 months, the doctor said in a voice that could double for comfort and bluntness. We'll do the DNA when the baby's born, or we can do a prenatal paternity test. But it's more invasive. I almost laughed because that's the world, right there. The most intimate proofs come with the most invasive procedures. We opted for the non-invasive prenatal paternity test, cheek swabs for Leela and a blood draw taken from her to capture fetal DNA in her bloodstream. It was modern and miraculous the way science could find truth in 70 milliliters of life. A week later, the test results arrived. Sam was the father. I remember the exact way the paper felt in my hand, cold, stiff, and entirely adequate at saying what I already suspected but couldn't afford to feel certain about. Leela wept quietly, one of those small, rich sobs that climbs out of the chest and leaves you exhausted. Henry closed his eyes and said nothing, which is what men do when they are both relieved and furious. I tasted salt and victory and grief all at once. The child was my husband's child by law and biology, whether the world decided to call it a miracle or a scandal. We moved fast after that, the legal cogs turning because adults run on documents. Henry drew up a provisional agreement, medical expenses covered, living stipend in escrow, independent counsel for Leela, and most importantly a clause that prevented any cash from changing hands in a public space. I insisted on the adoption route being clean, legal, and airtight. I did not want to buy a life. I wanted to accept one with everything properly registered and stamped. There were pauses, moments when I could see the world outside the clinic window and imagine a life in which I woke up to a little boy who laughed like Joshua used to. I allowed myself that image for a breath. I also allowed myself the fierceness of a woman who'd been cheated and robbed and who, palsied by sorrow though she was, had decided to choose carefully about what to keep. And then the funeral home called. They were curt, as funeral directors are taught to be efficient. Small-voiced people who handle the heavy things so you don't have to hold them alone. Miss Reynolds, the woman said, the urn is ready for pickup. My throat closed like a trap. I told her I'd send someone else. I asked Henry if he would take it to the cemetery. He said he would. I meant it. I don't want my son's ashes and my husband's ashes on the same shelf. You can judge that if you like. I will not argue with you. The thought of both in one room felt like running a hand along an open wire. Henry, being the gentleman grim he is, packed the urn into his car with a tenderness I'd never seen in him before. He drove 2 towns over to the cemetery and placed the small block of wood, my son's ashes, in the ground with the reverence of someone performing a sacred chore. He sent me a photo of the slab he had arranged, neat and with a small bouquet. My hands went numb when I looked at it. I prayed for Joshua in the way I always do, in small, practical manners, by paying attention, by naming things correctly, by arranging paper so that no one could claim ignorance. When Henry returned, dust on his shoes and an odd softness softened around his eyes, I asked him if he wanted to meet Leela. The question surprised me, the cadence of wonder in my own voice. He looked at me with the sort of slow clarity men give when they are weighing a truth. Do you love me, Cynthia? He asked one night, said without theater, the way you remove a bandage fast, honest. I told him the truth. Yes, I always have. I could see him brace like a man who had practiced this 1,000 times in the privacy of his chest. How long? I asked. Always, he said. Since college. Why did you say nothing? I demanded, half playful and half wounded. He gave me the embarrassed, honest answer of a man who'd thought himself noble and instead had been cowardly. I didn't want to make things worse for you. I thought Sam's marriage was your choice, and I didn't want to be the man who exploited your grief. He winced as he said it, the apology audible in the way people swallow regrets. Are you ready now? I asked. To step out from behind Sam's shadow. To be visible? He blinked. Yes, if you'll have me. You know I don't do pity marriages, I said. I don't fall into arms like rag dolls, but I do accept help. Right now, what I need is you to be law and loyalty, nothing less, he agreed. Together we finalized the escrow fund, the council, and the non-negotiable clauses. No secret payments, no unilateral disappearances, full medical records, DNA confirmation, and a planned hospital protocol for the delivery. Everything by the book, everything clean. And in the middle of the paperwork, late one night with the house quiet and the television playing old game shows downstairs, I made a decision. It was small and terrible and oddly tender. I took a pen and scrawled a name on a scrap of paper: Leonardo. For my grandfather, who sketched ships in the margins of novels and never let me forget how to draw a straight line when the world tried to curve me. I ordered a cemetery slab from a company that promises durability and tasteful topography. On the slab I chose a line that would make Sam's friends choke on their lies if they ever read it. Here lies a traitor, a womanizer, and a swindler. It was petty. It was perfect. If the man could spin a life of charm, at least his epitaph would be honest. Henry raised his eyebrows when he saw the mock-up. Is that honest? I said. I want history to be honest. You can't edit bones. He laughed then, a short, brittle sound that broke into something richer. Only you would order a headstone for someone who's already dead. Some people need the truth chiseled in stone, I said. Besides, it'll make a good postcard, we joked, because humor is the only way we let ourselves breathe. Even as the document clauses were signed and the slab's quote approved, a small voice in the back of my skull, the part that keeps receipts without telling you, nagged at me. Someone had filmed that night. Someone had taken money. Someone had been bold enough to drag my son's death into texts and threats. Whoever they were, they believed the dead would protect them. They'd miscalculated. In the quiet kitchen, I placed my palm over the paper with Leonardo's name and felt, absurdly, protective. The world changes when you plan to welcome a child into it, and not merely as an echo but as someone who will laugh and eat mismatched cookies and walk the dog and tilt toys into the light. I did not want to be replaced, and I did not want to replace Joshua with a stranger from Sam's mistakes. I wanted a boy who would be loved for himself and, if he was mine by adoption or biology, welcome into a home where truth is not negotiable. Do they think they can scare me off? I asked Henry. They do, he said, which makes them foolish and therefore vulnerable. I smiled, slow and quiet, like a cat who has stalked a mouse from under a couch. Good. Vulnerable is an excellent position from which to negotiate. That night, while the world slept or pretended to, I sat with the image of the epitaph and the name Leonardo tucked under my thumb. I thought of Joshua and how unfair the world had been. I thought of Sam and how many doors he'd left open, doors I intended to sweep clean. I thought of Leela, who was both victim and loose thread in a tapestry Sam had pulled across his life. And as I sat there, Henry asleep like a watchful dog in the guest room and the house breathing heavy with paper and secrets, I made another vow. I wouldn't let Sam ride into history on sympathy and funerals. I would make sure his son, if he came, knew who his father had been, and who had loved him regardless. I would name him. I would plan for him. I would make him learning proof against lies. There would be pain ahead, legal fights, perhaps public humiliation, certainly more nights with threats and blackmailers weaving their webs. But I had lost too much in the last year to be frightened into silence now. In the morning, Henry would take my husband's ashes to a tiny plot with the plainest stone. I'd let him place them. Men like him sometimes make the right choices. Somewhere in town, a stone would be ordered with a different inscription, one I intended to erect quietly when the moment was right. And when the baby was born, whatever name I put on his birth certificate would be a small act of defiance and insistence that even after a man lies, there's still room to create truth. I've heard people say that revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Cold revenge is tidy, calculated, polite, something men in suits whisper about over cigars. No, true revenge, the kind a woman earns after 58 years of swallowing other people's messes, is served hot, boiling, bubbling, with steam rising like a sermon. It's the kind that scalds you too, but you pour it anyway, because it's the only way to clean the stain. The weeks that followed were a blur of signatures, subpoenas, and sleepless nights. Henry filed the adoption paperwork and handled the estate settlement with a precision that made me want to kiss him and strangle him at the same time. The court wanted the DNA proof, the life insurance claim, and verification that I was of sound mind. That phrase, sound mind, tickled me. How does one prove sanity when standing on the grave of a liar? Meanwhile, the blackmail messages kept coming. Whoever they were clever enough to hide behind disposable numbers. Each one was short, direct, and laced with something personal. You can't rewrite him. Leela isn't who you think she is. You want to name the baby Leonardo? He already chose a name. That last one stung. I read it a dozen times before deleting it, but not before noticing the timestamp sent exactly 1 year to the minute after Joshua's crash. Henry, I said, sliding the phone across the table, tell me this isn't someone playing God. He frowned at the message, then looked up, jaw set. It's someone close. Someone who knows dates and details Sam wouldn't share publicly. Could be someone from his work. Could be someone who helped bury his secrets, I added. He reached across the table, took my hand. We'll find them. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat on the couch, the urn gone, but the memory of it still haunting the mantel. I thought about Sam's company's small local construction contracts, government tenders, a business built on handshakes and half-truths. I'd stayed out of it. He'd called it boring numbers and dirt, but boring numbers and dirt were exactly where men like to hide things. By sunrise, I'd decided to dig. I spent 2 days pretending to be the widow I was supposed to be, softly dressed, grateful, half-broken. The kind who brings cookies to the office and smiles to Wide when she says thank you for your support. It worked. The employees looked at me with a mix of pity and gossip hunger. The bookkeeper, a woman named May with a perm that defied physics, told me that Sam had been working on a private property project for nearly a year before his death. Paid in cash, she said, shrugging. He said it was for a friend. What friend? I asked. Didn't say. She looked nervous when I pressed. Her fingers twisted the pen like it was a prayer bead. He had me wire some funds to a contractor under the name Pinebrook Holdings. He said not to worry about it. It wasn't company money. Was it his? Maybe. He was secretive about that one. Henry did some digging that night and found the registration for Pinebrook Holdings. It was a shell company with no real assets, registered to a mailbox in a town 20 miles north. But the signature on the incorporation papers was a name I hadn't expected. Sarah Walters, Henry's estranged wife. When I showed him the file, his face strained. That's impossible, is it? I asked. Because I remember you saying you'd been separated for over a year. And these documents were filed 8 months ago. He stood abruptly, pacing. She must have done it with Sam's help. Maybe for taxes, maybe for blackmail. I finished for him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like a confession that hadn't yet found its words. I leaned back in my chair. You said she didn't know about your feelings for me. She doesn't, he insisted. Or didn't. I tilted my head. Henry, you're a good man. But good men make the best weapons when someone wants to stab a woman quietly. He winced. You think she's behind this? I think she's involved. And if she's involved, she knows about Sam. She might even know about Joshua. The next morning, I decided to pay Sarah Walters a visit. She lived in a beige condo with more mirrors than windows, a woman who had always preferred reflections to reality. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see me. That was my first clue. Cynthia, she said, smiling faintly. You look, well. I ignored the dig. You've been busy, I said, handing her a printed copy of the Pinebrook Holdings registration. Her eyes flicked to it and back to me. Ah, so you found it. That tone, casual, almost amused, told me everything. What was it, Sarah? I asked. Money laundering? Or just revenge for being married to the wrong man? She laughed softly. You always were sharper than people gave you credit for. Sam underestimated that. Sam underestimated everything. She leaned against the doorframe, studying me. He and I had business together. Nothing romantic, if that's what you're imagining. Then what? Sam needed cash. I needed leverage. Pinebrook was leverage. Leverage for what? To keep Henry from leaving me penniless. I blinked. So you used my husband to blackmail your husband. Call it what you want, she said. It worked. Until Sam died and took half my money with him. I stepped closer. You've been sending me messages. The notes, the texts, the urn photo. For a moment, her eyes gleamed, then softened into something like pity. Oh, Cynthia, if I wanted to ruin you, I wouldn't use words. Then who? She shrugged. Sam made a lot of promises to a lot of people. Maybe one of them didn't like being left out of the will. I could tell she was lying, but I didn't push. Sometimes you let liars marinate in their own words until they start to season themselves. As I turned to leave, she said quietly, "Be careful with that girl, the pregnant one. You think she's innocent because she cries well, but she's not crying for you." I didn't answer. I walked out and didn't look back. That night, I went to see Leela at the motel. The TV was flickering quietly with some talk show rerun. She looked up when I came in, guilt written across her face like cheap makeup. "Where were you this afternoon?" I asked. "I had a doctor's appointment," without telling me or Henry. I needed time to think. I sat across from her. "Sarah Walters says you're not crying for me." Her lip trembled. "Sarah Walters? You know her?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She called me after Sam died, said she could help me get what I was owed. She told me about Pinebrook Holdings." I exhaled, leaning back. "So you were in on it?" "Not at first," she pleaded. I didn't know what she wanted. She said she'd make sure the baby was safe, that she'd take care of everything if I gave her information about Sam. Then she asked about the video about Joshua. I told her I didn't know anything. "You're telling me now that Sarah is behind this?" She shook her head violently. "No, she's part of it, but there's someone else. A man." She called him Mr. R. He was the one who paid her. The room tilted slightly, the air thickening. I knew that name, or at least the initial. Sam had once mentioned an investor, Mr. R, when explaining why we couldn't afford Joshua's tuition increase. I'd assumed he meant a banker, but maybe he meant something darker. "Where can I find him?" I asked. She whispered, "At the lake house." I laughed softly, a sound without humor. Of course, the lake house. Always back to that cursed place. Leela grabbed my arm suddenly, desperate. "Cynthia, please, don't go alone." "I never go alone anymore," I said, standing. When I told Henry what she'd said, he didn't argue. He just looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from watching the world rearrange itself too many times. "What will you do if you find him?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I do know what inscription I want on his stone." The next night, we drove north again. The moon was bright, cruelly so, lighting the road like a spotlight on sin. When we reached the lake, the air was colder than I remembered. The cabin looked empty from the outside, but the faintest glow flickered from inside. "Stay in the car," I told Henry. "Not a chance." We stepped onto the porch. The door was ajar, creaking softly. Inside, the fire was burning, but no one was in sight. Then a voice came from the shadows. "Mrs. Reynolds," it said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd come." A tall man stepped into the light. Late 40s, slick hair, expensive coat. He smiled like someone who practiced it for a living. "I'm Robert," he said. "Mr. R, as you've no doubt heard." I didn't flinch. "You've been very busy, Mr. R. Care to explain why you've been sending me ghost mail?" He chuckled. "Sam owed me. He promised me half of Pinebrook's profits. When he died, that deal vanished. But then I learned about the baby. I thought, what better collateral than blood?" Henry stepped forward. "You're extorting a grieving widow. That's a felony." Robert's smile widened. "Only if you can prove it." I looked at the fireplace, the same one that had hidden Sam's secrets, and then back at Robert. "You're right, I can't prove it." And then I picked up the poker. He froze. "Now, Mrs. Reynolds, Cynthia," I corrected him. "Mrs. Reynolds is dead, buried next to her cheating husband." Henry's hand touched my arm, warning. "Cynthia, don't." Smiled. "Relax, counselor. I'm just making a point." I pointed the poker at Robert's chest. "You're going to sign a confession. You're going to give me every name, every transaction, every lie you told Sam, and you're going to disappear. If you don't, I'll make sure your ashes end up right next to his, under the same slab." His smirk faltered. "You wouldn't try me." He saw something in my eyes that convinced him I would. Because I absolutely would. Henry slid a document across the table, prepared in advance, of course. A full written confession, legally binding, notarized the moment Robert's pen hit the page. I hadn't asked him to prepare it, but of course he had. "Henry knows me too well." Robert signed, hand trembling. When it was done, I lowered the poker and smiled sweetly. "See, that wasn't so hard." He glared at me. "You'll regret this." "Doubtful," I said. "I'm all out of regrets." By the time we left, dawn was bleeding over the lake. The snow glowed faintly pink, and the world felt almost new. In the car, Henry reached over and squeezed my hand. You scared me tonight, he said softly. You should see me when I'm really angry, I replied. He smiled, shaking his head. What will you do now? I looked out at the horizon. I'll wait for that baby to be born. I'll name him Leonardo. I'll raise him to know the truth, not the lies his father built. Henry nodded. And me? You'll stay, I said. If you dare. He laughed quietly. Oh, I dare. And as we drove away from the lake house for the last time, I looked in the rearview mirror and whispered, Rest easy, Sam. I've finally cleaned up your mess. And this time, the ashes won't lie for you. Some endings come quietly, like a candle flickering out. Others arrive like thunder after a long drought, loud, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. Mine was the latter. 3 weeks after the lake house, the sky finally began to thaw. Winter was loosening its grip on the town, and with it, so was I. The air didn't taste like bitterness anymore. It tasted like survival. Robert's confession was now locked safely in Henry's office, notarized and witnessed by a man who owed Henry too many favors to ever question legality. The document tied everything together: Pinebrook Holdings, Sarah's involvement, the blackmail, the money laundering, and the video of Joshua's last night. Henry filed it quietly with the authorities through an intermediary, making sure no one could trace it back to me. Sam's death, they now suspected, wasn't as innocent as it had seemed. But the man himself was beyond punishment. I'd already carved his epitaph, both literally and figuratively. The law could have its paper. I already had my justice. The baby was due in late May. Leela and I had an uneasy truce, like two women holding opposite ends of a story they didn't want to tell. I visited her twice a week, brought her meals, helped her find an apartment closer to the hospital. She had stopped wearing perfume. Good choice. There were days when I hated her youth, her foolishness, her belly carrying what should have been my future. And then there were other days when I found myself touching the curve of that belly and whispering things even I didn't expect to say. You're not to blame, I'd murmur. Your father was. But I'll fix what he broke. She'd look at me with those wide eyes, unsure if I meant it. I did. The night she went into labor, I was the one she called. Henry drove us both, calm and efficient as ever, while Leela screamed enough to remind me that life doesn't enter this world quietly. By dawn, there was a cry. A boy. Healthy, loud, full of fight. When they handed him to me for the first time, tiny, furious, warm, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. I'll never forgive Sam. But it was something close to mercy. Leela named him Leo. She looked at me, eyes shining with exhaustion, and said, He should be yours. We signed the papers 2 weeks later. The adoption went through faster than I expected, thanks to Henry's tireless precision and a judge who seemed relieved to hand the baby to a woman who knew how to hold her spine straight. I brought Leo home in June, on a bright afternoon that smelled of cut grass and new beginnings. His nursery had been Joshua's old room, repainted in soft gray with little golden stars. I kept one photo of Joshua on the dresser, him smiling, arms slung around his father's shoulders. For years, that photo had made me ache. Now it made me determined. This is your brother, I whispered to the baby. He'll teach you what kind of man not to become. A month later, the new headstone arrived. I took Leo in his stroller and Henry by my side. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for permission. Sam's grave was modest, a small plot under an oak tree, nothing flashy. The workers had already set the new slab in place. I brushed off the dust and read the words I'd chosen. Here lies a traitor, a womanizer, and a swindler, survived by the woman WHO taught him consequences. Henry let out a slow, stunned laugh. You really did it. I don't bluff, Henry. Never have. He put an arm around my shoulders. You're unbelievable. I smiled. That's one word for it. Leo stirred in his stroller, making a small sound, half yawn, half protest. I leaned over and kissed his forehead. Don't worry, sweetheart. He can't hurt anyone anymore. For a moment, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves above. I imagined Sam's ghost trying to speak, but I didn't bother listening. I'd heard enough lies from that man to last a lifetime. Henry and I stood there for a while, saying nothing. Then I took his hand. You know, I said, I used to think love was about loyalty, staying, no matter what. But now I think it's about courage, about choosing who stands beside you when the smoke clears. He squeezed my hand gently. Then let me keep standing. I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who'd waited decades, who'd cleaned up another man's mess without complaint, who'd stayed when it would have been easier to leave. You sure you're ready for a woman like me? I asked. He smiled, slow and sure. Cynthia, I've been ready since you broke your first wooden spoon. We both laughed quietly, like people who'd earned the right to. That night, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, the expensive kind from Sam's collection, the one I'd been saving for something worth toasting. I walked out onto the porch, the summer air soft against my skin, and looked up at the stars. Leo was asleep inside, breathing softly, the baby monitor humming on the table beside me. The world was still broken, but it was mine again. I raised the glass toward the sky. To Joshua, I said. To Leo. To every woman who learns to elate what her husband really was and still finds a way to win. I took a long sip, the kind that burns going down but leaves you standing taller. Behind me, Henry came out, barefoot, holding Leo's blanket. He draped it over my shoulders and kissed the side of my neck. "You're home," he murmured. I smiled into the dark. Finally, we stood there in silence, two people who had walked through fire and decided to build a garden on the ashes. And as the night deepened, I realized something. Revenge might start with anger, but it ends with freedom. Leo stirred again, a soft sigh from the baby monitor. I listened to it like music. I turned to Henry and whispered, "Let's teach him the truth. Not the fairy tales," he nodded. "The truth is the best inheritance." "Exactly," I said, clinking my glass against his. "And I intend to make him rich." Then I looked out at the horizon, my horizon, and smiled, not bitterly this time, but with something dangerously close to peace. Because for the first time in a long, long while, every lie was buried, every secret unearthed, and every man who had underestimated me was either gone or kneeling. Cynthia Reynolds had survived. And survival, my dear, is the most elegant revenge of all.